Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the press briefing. We have with us Mr. Nagaraj Naidu, Joint Secretary G20, and Ms. Enam Gambhir, also Joint Secretary G20. They're also co-chairs of the Development Working Group. They will first brief the media. Is that okay, sir? And then we'll proceed to the questions, if any. Sir, over to you.
Hello. Is my voice audible? Thanks. So good evening to all of you. And since I don't know how many of you were there in the morning today, this is the second meeting of the Development Working Group. The Development Working Group is one of the most important working groups of the Sherpa track of the G20. And we are working towards some very substantial developmental outcomes that will have a huge impact on the Sustainable Development Goals. There are certain issues that we are discussing with all the G20 countries. It touches upon the issue of life, which is lifestyles for the environment, which is something that India has put forward as an initiative to demonstrate, or to rather change the existing discourse on climate action. And we are also talking about transitions which are just and green. Within these transitions, our focus is on the digital transition. We're looking at just green transition, and finally we're also looking at women-led development. And then we have the action plan for the SDGs, for the Sustainable Development Goals. All of you are very clearly aware that this is 2023 and we just have 7 more years to meet the goals of Agenda 2030. And as such, previous to this, there were 2 years of pandemic, and now all of this has impacted the developmental achievements all over the world, particularly in the global south, where the SDGs have reversed. So in order to make it up, we just have 7 more years. And so the world is looking at India and the current G20 presidency to see as to how can India deliver on these SDGs. So within the broad framework of what we are doing here, I think I will speak on the data for development, and my colleague Enam will speak on life and green development. On the data side, I think our push is for data for development. We all keep talking of data, but the point is, how do you utilize data for the greater good? That's the big question. Unless you are able to apply data analytics to the data, you will not be able to derive actionable intelligence which can get into efficient service delivery, targeted outcomes, as well as help you in your policy making decisions. But for all of this to happen, data must be accurate, data must be reliable, data must be accessible. So as long as it's going to meet these 3 conditions, I think countries will be able to make very informed choices. That's what we heard in the morning today. The side event that we had was primarily to discuss these very big issues pertaining to data for development, to educate some of the G20 countries who are here to see different perspectives, different dimensions of data for development, and then arrive at conclusions. So tomorrow when we meet at the formal meeting, the day-long discussions that we have today, to a large extent will also influence their thinking to what we see as data for development for the global south. So we are also, as one of our outcomes, we are looking at whether the G20 can agree to a capacity building network for data for development. This is essentially to assist countries and enhance their capabilities to utilize data for their own good. So this is largely, I think, what we are pushing for on the data side. Another important aspect is women-led development. This is something that is a very key priority of India's G20 presidency. Within the women-led development is a new concept in when we talk of gender equality and women empowerment, the entire discourse has seen women at the center of development. But this is something very unique that we have put forward when we say women-led development. It includes all of this, but with the focus that women have to lead development as far as decisions concerning women are concerned, whether it is climate challenges, whether it is health outcomes, whether it is nutritional outcomes. We really want women to lead decision making in these areas. We want women not to be passive recipients of development, but become active agents of change. And that is only possible if they are put in positions of leadership in which they can really take decisions. We are also working towards seeing as to what we can do in the area of economic empowerment of women. Our action plan is going to focus on it. We are looking at bridging the gender digital divide as to what can we do to ensure that more women and girls take opportunity and participate in the digital revolution that we see all around us. And also as to, we do not want Industrial Revolution 4.0 to bypass women. That's the last thing that we want. We want more women leaders in STEM. We want to ensure that our foundational learnings that we have commence early, particularly with a focus on STEM and women and girls. So this is a huge focus of our presidency. We're also looking as to how we can address the issue of health and nutrition. All of these issues kind of touch upon all the 17 SDG goals. So women-led development is very, very crucial. Our outcomes are very, very substantive, and we hope that our two priorities of data as well as women-led development will lead to something extremely concrete for the G20 as well as for the world. Now I'll ask my colleague to take it. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to PIB as well. Good evening to all colleagues present here. I think it's also very important to list out why this meeting is very important and why we had created this agenda for the side events to basically push the narrative that we want the G20 to cover. So as some of you know, our Prime Minister is very keen that this forum delivers on the agenda that is important for developing countries. I think it is with that in mind that he had organized the Voice of Global South Summit in January, where he listened to 125 countries, developing countries around the world, precisely for the purpose that India will be the voice, that voice of those countries which are not represented in an important grouping like G20, because G20 should not be seen as a group of rich countries and big developing countries and things like that. The agenda of the G20 has to make sense to the rest of the world, especially the developing countries. So I think with that perspective, as Ambassador Naidu mentioned about the needs on capacity building and women issues, what we are really trying to bring is, some of you have followed the discussions on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are very basic goals actually. If you see, zero hunger, health care being provided, and energy access being there, poverty alleviation. And I think given the lack of progress or even moving behind on those goals that we have seen in the last several years, and how the world saw the developing countries not getting enough support as they should have gotten, the world getting more and more fragmented going by the day, who is going to speak for the fact that that agenda is the core agenda? How much fragmentation we may have in the world, that's a separate matter, but we must never drop the ball on the development agenda, because that actually speaks to the people who are the most vulnerable and have no voice. And I think India therefore has taken that leadership of representing their voice and their needs into the developing, into the G20 grouping. Now, within that context, why this working group is important? Sherpa has spoken about the development working group as being the heart and soul of G20. Why? Because what it covers, the Sustainable Development Goals, touches upon everything. It touches upon each of the Sherpa track issues. It touches upon all the finance issues, because development is about everything, and therefore it is the hardest but at the same time most important agenda to tackle. So this year, given the fact that we know that the developing countries are dealing with some of the very immediate concerns of, you must have read and heard about the liquidity issues, the COVID, impact also created a lot of problems for their economies, and the poverty going behind and all of that. Yet at the same time, there is a push for moving towards a greener transition. So, phasing away of coal and move. But how is it that the developing countries will be able to move towards that transition? Because transition also has its own cost if their basic needs are not taken care of. So I think what we are really trying to do with the discussion on life and with the discussion, especially on the just green transition, we are saying that transitions have to be globally just. It has to, so for example, if a climate policy of a big country has an impact on another country which is smaller, we must be responsible to ensure that that impact is smoothened and is eventually taken care of, so that the development agenda in any country is not impacted. So I think we are taking up this need of the developing country agenda from a justice perspective, from a climate justice and equity perspective, because this is also something that has been enshrined in the international agreements, like the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, that because of the historical responsibilities of the developed countries who have polluted the world and become wealthy on the basis of a certain industrialization which had its own negative connotations, there is a need now for supporting the developing countries, and it's not a favor. It is a matter of right, and it is also a matter of an interconnectedness of our global economy. So COVID demonstrated that very much to us, that anyone left behind is a problem for the rest of the world. So I think climate issues also speak to that. So I think the way we are positioning, so we are coming up with a strong action plan on the Sustainable Development Goals, because we want that G20, especially at this time, when the Sustainable Development Goals are lagging behind, moving in the opposite direction, comes together and gives a political momentum. And that momentum will then mobilize the international organization, mobilize the multilateral development banks to act more and be more ambitious. And that is the action, that is the impact that we want to have with this political momentum that we want to bring. Because G20 at the end of the day is not a legislative body. It's a messaging, momentum, political will creating body, and this is what our intention is. Life here fits in very well, because life really speaks about the discussion on climate from a very last mile perspective. That is not only about closing down or phasing out of coal, it's also about ensuring what is it that we are producing with that coal plant, which goes and fuels consumption in other society. Until that consumption is taken care of, the climate action will never be addressed. So we need to take a holistic approach, and in this, our Prime Minister has become, has come out as very visionary, because as a developing country, most of the developing countries want to become a manufacturing hub, and yet India is taking that leap and saying we need to reduce consumption while meeting basic needs of our people, because Prime Minister believes that that's the only way you can address the climate agenda in the long term. You cannot address it only by focusing on energy sources. There has to be a holistic, all stakeholder approach, and by bringing individual, he has done two things at one time. He has created an all stakeholder discussion on this, and secondly, he's democratized that debate and made that individual part of these discussions and not only a recipient of these policies. So I think we want, after India, this movement, this initiative to be endorsed by the G20 and then the world, so that the global discourse on some of these issues can be changed. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Any questions from the media, please? Yes, please. Please introduce yourself and then ask a question.
My name is Sunish. I am working for N Malayalam, an online news portal. Climate justice is a very critical challenge. It's a global phenomenon also. One side is development going and population is going. how we overcome, politically overcome, and how policy will come for to this critical gap will be filled. It is possible.
So if I understand your question correctly, you're saying how do we, reach our climate targets with, yeah. So I think no, and I understand, there is a lot of narrative about these things which makes one feel, especially the individuals which are at the receiving end of this, feeling that they can't do anything or nothing can be done. And I think this is exactly what we aim to change. Now, this needs an all-stakeholder approach, and I think this is exactly what we tried to bring in our side event as well. That only focusing on one aspect of it and changing the, not changing the other aspects of it, especially consumption, especially, how the industry is reacting is not going to. So I think it is possible and it will be possible as, if the developing countries sort of keep pushing for it, because it is also understandable, I mean not understandable, but it is true that there is a certain resistance from the developed countries in terms of either putting in more money or, seeing that we should not silo the climate and development approach. But that is a very reason why there is a very strong emphasis on climate justice from the developing countries. So I think we did achieve very strong outcomes in Paris. We have, achieved strong outcomes in the different COP discussions that we have. And we think that with the agenda that we have brought in, we are receiving a lot of positive feedback, even from the developed countries, saying that you are being ambitious and maybe that is required. Because I think no one wants to be at the, seated and seeing, the industries and communities falling apart and, going back in poverty. So I think this is something that they have also realized. France is, for example, doing an important financing pact summit in June. So, a lot of other G7 countries are also mobilizing. We have, slightly sort of difference of opinion on how to do it, but that is why this forum is important, G20, which brings together various stakeholders. So I think, it is possible with ambition, and this is exactly what at least we, with the support of other developing countries, are trying to do. We have Brazil who is following us. They are fully, in support of what we are doing in South Africa after that. And I think we will, with the ambition, we should be able to get there.
Anyone else, please? Alfonsa, Manorama? Yes, please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Alfonsa John. I am representing Malayalam Manorama newspaper. And as you said, women-led development is the main aim of this G20 this time. I would like to know the gender ratio of participation of women in these events, all these events. How many women are participating?
To begin with, I think we can give you a much clearer data maybe tomorrow, because tomorrow is the first day of the official meeting. But if you, I presume you participated in the side event today?
Yes, sir.
From morning to evening?
Yes.
What did you see? Among the panelists, every panel that you've seen has been gender balanced. Exactly. In some places there has been more women than men. So this has been our endeavor throughout this presidency to make sure that women are represented. Even, you see here, one co-chair happens to be a colleague of mine. And so I think there is a very clear focus by this government that, we will be a very action-oriented presidency. We will not just indulge in sloganeering, but perhaps we will move beyond sloganeering to actually implementing it. So it's a very considered endeavor. Wherever you see, we have ensured women's participation, practically. Even on the logos you will see how everything on the G20, how distribution is done. You bring in women, we bring in women doctors, scientists. Our attempt is to utilize the G20 presidency to take messages. The whole Prime Minister keeps saying Jan Bhagidari, or how can you take G20 to the public? I think this is the first time this is happening. G20 is in our country is being organized in over 56 cities. So this is the largest scale of operation of the G20. And the prime goal is to ensure, it is to demystify G20, to make it, to democratize G20, not make it a capital-centered G20. It is so that each one, like, who could have thought that a G20 meeting will take place in Kumarakom? You know, it's in the backwaters, it's a beautiful place, but not somewhere where you see a large conference being organized. So this could have happened in Kochi, but not in Kumarakom. So that is the approach our G20 presidencies, and you will see the focus on women all through. So right now, Kerala is seeing two important meetings. One in Trivandrum, in Thiruvananthapuram, where you have the G20 Empower meeting is going on. I think today is the last day, whereas you have the development working group which is going to kickstart, and we had the first day today. So, I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Anyone else, please? Yes.
I'm Amiruddin, correspondent for Russia Today. I have 3 event-specific questions. One is, how many countries participated in today's deliberations? Number 2, what is your overall assessment of the outcome of the deliberations? And number 3 is, what are tomorrow's agenda?
I think, if you've sat through today, okay. So everybody is here. All countries have come because the G20 cannot operate without everybody coming in. So all G20 countries have participated in the morning. At the same time, we've invited 9 guest countries. Some of them have come, already reached. Some maybe are coming tomorrow. We have a number of international organizations which are our partners as part of our journey of our presidency. So they are all here. So the exact details and all, maybe we'll ask my colleague, we will hand it over to you. But to put it at rest, all the G20 countries are here. 1 or 2 countries, maybe one country could have not come physically, but their embassy in Delhi will be representing them. Maybe I think South Korea. Maybe somebody is sick in their family or something like that, so the delegate could not travel. But their embassy in Delhi is representing that delegation. Apart from that, everybody is here. And as far as the deliverables are concerned, I think today's side event has been extremely successful. Not a single person left, and throughout the day the deliberations. See, the whole objective of having a side event is to get civil society, get the private sector, get the knowledge partners to speak about an issue. Because see, I am a policy maker, but I'm not like a specialist in every issue. Then how do I educate myself? So these side events serve a very special purpose. We bring in alternate voices, because the more voices everybody gets to hear, it contributes to far much more efficient deliberation. So that is the point. Today you saw civil society members participate, you saw private sector come in, you saw companies participate. We had somebody who is in the social impact domain. The Kabadiwala company had come to see how they are able to apply data to waste collection and data, and creating wealth out of it. So, these are very, very unique things, and each participant is informed by these, experiences that get narrated. So all of this will feed into, the deliberations tomorrow. And as far as what is the agenda, we just spoke about the agenda. Our agenda is very development oriented. It has a climate dimension. It has a transition dimension, which we referred to. It's called Just Green Transitions. We are looking at digital transitions, and we are looking at women-led development. All of this will feed into something called as the action plan for the Sustainable Development Goals. The G20 has its action plan. The G20 as a grouping, we will all come together, see what we as a grouping can do to really give the additional push for the attainment of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Any other question, please? I think that's it. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, dear media friends. See you all tomorrow.